The gymnasium fell silent except for the sound of blood dripping onto the polished floor. Madison Chun stood over the writhing figure of Trevor Blackwood, the school's most feared bully, his mouth a crimson mess where 3 of his front teeth used to be. The dirt that had been forced into her mouth moments earlier was now mixed with the metallic taste of her own split lip, but her stance remained perfectly balanced, her right leg still extended from the devastating kick that had just changed. Everything. You wanted to see what this exchange student could do, Madison said quietly, her Korean accent barely noticeable through the controlled fury in her voice. Now you know. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn rain hammered against the windows of Westfield High. School as Principal Davis adjusted his tie for the 3rd time that morning. The exchange student program had brought many international students to their small Connecticut town over the years, but something about this particular arrival felt different. Perhaps it was the timing mid-October, well after the school year had settled into its rhythm. Or maybe it was the unusual circumstances that had brought 17-year-old Madison Chen to their doorstep. Madison stood in the main office, her black hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing a modest gray sweater and dark jeans that seemed to blend into the institutional beige of the surroundings. Her posture was unnaturally straight, shoulders squared in a way that suggested military precision rather than teenage awkwardness. She carried only a small backpack and a worn leather messenger bag that had seen better days. Miss Chun, Principal. Davis began, consulting the paperwork scattered across his desk. We're delighted to have you join our school community. I understand you've come to us from Seoul through our emergency placement program. Madison nodded once, her dark eyes meeting his steadily. Yes, sir. There were some complications with my original host family arrangement in California. The program coordinator thought a smaller school environment might be more suitable. What she didn't mention, what the carefully sanitized reports in her file didn't reveal, was that her previous placement had ended abruptly when she'd intervened. In a situation involving her host family's neighbor and his wife. The black eye she'd given the man had healed, but the legal complications had made it necessary to relocate her quickly and quietly. Well, you'll find Westfield very welcoming. Principal Davis continued, seemingly oblivious to the tension radiating from his new student. Mrs. Patterson, our guidance counselor, will show you around and help you get settled. I believe you're staying with the Morrison family? Yes, sir. They've been very kind. The Morrison family had indeed been kind, though Madison sensed an underlying nervousness in their hospitality. Janet Morrison, a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, had immediately noticed the old scars on Madison's knuckles and the way she moved through their house like she was constantly assessing exits and potential threats. Her husband, Robert, a mild-mannered accountant, had tried to make conversation about Seoul and Madison's family, but had quickly learned that certain topics were off-limits. Their daughter, Emma, a sophomore at Westfield High, had been the most direct in her curiosity. Do you like running from something? She'd asked on Madison's second night, as they sat in the Morrisons' comfortable living room watching a movie. Madison had considered the question carefully before answering. Everyone is running from something. The question is whether you're running towards something better. Now, as Mrs. Patterson led her through the hallways of Westfield High, Madison cataloged the social dynamics with the same systematic approach she'd learned in her other life. Groups of students clustered around lockers, their conversations creating a constant hum of adolescent energy. She noticed the subtle hierarchies, the way certain students commanded space while others seemed to shrink into themselves. You're first. Class is Advanced Placement Literature with Mr. Hendricks, Mrs. Patterson explained, her voice carrying the forced cheer of someone who had given this tour countless times. He's wonderful with international students, very patient. Madison suppressed a smile. In Seoul, She'd been reading Dostoevsky and Tolstoy in English translation by the time she was 14. Her language skills were far beyond what anyone at Westfield High would expect from an exchange student, but she'd learned the value of allowing people to underestimate her. The literature classroom was a sanctuary of worn wooden desks and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that immediately reminded Madison of her grandfather's study. Mr. Hendricks, a thin man in his 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, looked up from his desk as they entered. "You must be Madison," he said, rising to shake her hand. "Welcome to Westfield. I hope you'll find our discussion stimulating." "Thank you, sir. I'm looking forward to it." As Mrs. Patterson left to continue her other duties, Mr. Hendricks gestured toward an empty desk in the middle of the room. "Please, take a seat wherever you're comfortable. We're just finishing up our discussion of Steinbeck's The Pearl before we move on to our next unit." Madison chose a desk near the back corner, positioning herself with a clear view of both the door and the windows. Old habits died hard, and even in a small-town high school, she felt more comfortable when she could monitor all potential exits. The other students filtered in gradually, their conversations dying down as they noticed the new face in their midst. Madison felt their curious glances but kept her attention focused on the novel open on her desk. She'd read The Pearl years ago, had written essays about its themes of corruption and the American dream, but she listened politely as Mr. Hendricks guided the class through their analysis. The pearl itself becomes a symbol of destructive desire, a girl with carefully styled blonde hair was saying. Kino's obsession with its potential value blinds him to its true cost. "Excellent observation, Brittany," Mr. Hendricks replied. "Can anyone build on that? What about the concept of the pearl as a false promise?" Madison found herself raising her hand almost involuntarily. "In Korean culture, we have a saying, the most beautiful flower often grows in the most dangerous soil. The pearl represents something beautiful that emerges from an environment of poverty and struggle, but its beauty is tainted by the violence and greed it awakens." The room fell silent. Madison realized she'd spoken with far more fluency and sophistication than anyone had expected from the quiet exchange student in the corner. Mr. Hendricks smiled broadly. "That's a fascinating perspective, Madison. The intersection of beauty and danger is certainly central to Steinbeck's narrative." As the class continued, Madison became aware of a new quality in the attention she was receiving. Where before it had been simple curiosity, now there was something else, a measuring quality, as if she were being evaluated and categorized. After class, as students filed out into the hallway, Madison found herself surrounded by a small group of her new classmates. Brittany, the blonde girl who'd spoken earlier, stepped forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Madison, right? I'm Brittany Walsh. That was really insightful what you said about the pearl. You speak English really well." "Thank you," Madison replied simply, slinging her messenger bag over her shoulder. "So where exactly are you from?" This from a tall boy with perfectly styled hair and the kind of confident bearing that suggested he was used to being the center of attention. "I'm Chase Hamilton, by the way, student body president." "Seoul," Madison answered, noting the way the group had positioned themselves to block her path to the door. "Cool, cool. And what's that like? I mean, is it super different from here?" Madison studied Chase's face, recognizing the performance of casual interest that barely concealed something less friendly. "Different in some ways, similar in others. People are people everywhere." "Right, of course." Chase's smile faltered slightly. "It's just, we don't get a lot of international students here, especially ones who are so articulate." The emphasis on the last word was subtle but unmistakable. Madison felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she'd experienced in her previous school when classmates had begun to resent her academic performance. "I should get to my next class," she said, stepping to the side to move around. The group, "Oh, what do you have next?" Brittany asked, falling into step beside her. Madison consulted her schedule. Advanced chemistry with Mrs. Rodriguez. No way, Chase and I are both in that class. We can walk together. As they moved through the hallways, Madison noticed the way other students' eyes followed their small procession. Chase and Brittany were clearly significant figures in the school's social hierarchy, and being seen with them marked Madison as someone worth noticing. The chemistry classroom was modern and well-equipped, with black lab benches arranged in pairs. Throughout the room, Mrs. Rodriguez, an energetic woman in her 40s, welcomed Madison warmly and assigned her to a lab station with a quiet girl named Sarah who seemed genuinely friendly. "Don't let the mean girls get to you," Sarah whispered as they prepared for the day's experiment. Brittany and her crew can be pretty territorial about new students, especially smart ones. Mean girls? You know, the popular crowd. They're not used to competition, academic or otherwise. And you definitely made an impression in lit class. Madison nodded, understanding immediately. She'd encountered similar dynamics in Seoul, though the cultural expressions were different. Hierarchy and competition were universal languages even. If the specific words varied as the class progressed, Madison found herself relaxing slightly. The precise measurements and chemical reactions were familiar and comforting, requiring the same kind of focus and attention to detail that had been drilled into her in other contexts. She and Sarah worked well together, completing their experiment efficiently while other pairs struggled with the calculations. "Excellent work, you two," Mrs. Rodriguez said, examining their results. "Madison, you show real aptitude for chemistry. Have you considered pursuing it in college?" "I'm still exploring my options," Madison replied diplomatically. The truth was more complicated. Her plans for the future had been derailed by the circumstances that had brought her to Westfield, and she was still trying to determine what was possible now. Lunch period arrived with the usual chaos of teenagers, navigating the social minefield of the cafeteria. Madison purchased a simple sandwich and looked around for a place to sit. She spotted Emma Morrison at a table with several other sophomores and started to walk over, but found her path blocked by Chase Hamilton and two other boys she didn't recognize. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Hey Madison," Chase said, his smile bright and seemingly genuine. "Why don't you come sit with us? We'd love to hear more about Korea." Madison glanced toward Emma's table, then back at Chase. Something in his tone made her cautious, but she couldn't identify a specific threat. "That's very kind of you." Chase led her to a large table near the center of the cafeteria where Brittany and several other students were already seated. Madison recognized the dynamics immediately. This was the popular table, the social epicenter of the school. Being invited to sit here was either a genuine gesture of acceptance or a setup for something else. "So Madison," Brittany said as Madison settled into her seat, "tell us about Seoul. Is it true that everyone there is super competitive about grades?" "Academic achievement is valued," Madison replied carefully. "But I think students everywhere feel pressure to succeed." "Right, but how competitive?" This from a girl with auburn hair and sharp features who introduced herself as Vanessa. "I heard Asian schools are insane about test scores and stuff." Madison felt the familiar weight of cultural stereotyping settling around her like a heavy blanket. Every school system has its challenges. What matters is finding ways to support each other rather than compete destructively. "That's so wise," Chase said, but there was an edge to his voice that Madison didn't like. "It must be nice to have that perspective. I bet you're going to do really well here academically. I hope to do my best in all my classes." "I'm sure you will," Brittany said sweetly, "especially with your obvious advantages." Madison set down her sandwich and looked directly at Brittany. "What advantages would those be?" "Oh, you know, the whole cultural background thing. Teachers always love international students. It's like automatic sympathy points. The table fell silent except for the ambient noise of the cafeteria around them. Madison felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that had gotten her into trouble before, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I think teachers appreciate students who work hard and contribute to class discussions," she said evenly. "That's true regardless of where someone comes from." "Of course," Chase said quickly, shooting Brittany a warning look. "We're just saying you bring a unique perspective that's really valuable." Madison finished her sandwich in silence, aware that she was being evaluated and judged by standards she didn't fully understand. The conversation continued around her, but she noticed the way certain topics were steered toward her cultural background, the way her responses were scrutinized for signs of otherness. As the lunch period ended, Madison excused herself and walked toward her next class. She was halfway down the hallway when she heard footsteps behind her and turned to see a boy she hadn't met before, tall, with messy brown hair and paint stains on his fingers. "Hey," he said, slightly out of breath. "I'm Marcus Webb. I sit at the table behind Chase's crew at lunch. I just wanted to say, don't let them get to you. They do this with every new student who might threaten their academic ranking." Madison studied his face, noting the genuine concern in his eyes. "Thank you for the warning. It's just ... I've seen what they can do when they feel threatened. And you obviously impressed them in lit class. Just be careful, okay?" As Marcus walked away, Madison felt the familiar weight of isolation settling around her. She'd hoped that coming to a small American town might be different from the competitive environment of Seoul, but human nature was apparently universal. The faces were different, the cultural expressions varied, but the fundamental dynamics of power and competition remained the same. Her next class was World History with Mr. Patterson, husband to the guidance counselor who'd given her the tour. The irony wasn't lost on Madison that she was taking a class about world history while being treated as an exotic specimen herself. The lesson focused on the Cold War, and Madison found herself in the uncomfortable position of being asked to provide insight into Asian perspectives on the conflict. She answered as diplomatically as possible, but she could feel the weight of her classmates' attention, the way they hung on her words not because of their content, but because of their source. After class, as Madison gathered her books, she overheard Brittany talking to Vanessa by the door. "Did you see how Mr. Patterson was practically fawning over her? It's like having a real live Asian person in class makes everything she says automatically profound. I know, right? And did you notice how she corrected his pronunciation of those Korean names? So condescending." Madison hadn't corrected anything. She'd simply answered a direct question about the proper pronunciation when Mr. Patterson had asked. But she was beginning to understand that her very existence at Westfield High was being interpreted through a lens of resentment and competition. The final class of the day was Physical Education with Coach Morrison, no relation to her host family. Despite the shared surname, Madison had been dreading this class, knowing that her physical capabilities would be difficult to hide in a gymnasium setting. The other students were already changing into their gym clothes when Madison arrived at the locker room. She'd brought appropriate athletic wear, but she was keenly aware of the scars on her forearms and the calluses on her hands that would be visible in a t-shirt and shorts. "Nice muscles," Brittany commented as Madison changed clothes. "Do you work out a lot back home?" "I try to stay active," Madison replied, pulling her t-shirt over her head quickly. "Those are some serious calluses," Vanessa observed, noting Madison's hands. "What kind of activities give you calluses like that?" Madison flexed her fingers, aware that the calluses were from years of training with wooden staffs and practice weapons, not from typical teenage activities. "Various sports and activities. Different things are popular in different places." Coach Morrison's voice echoed through the gymnasium as the class assembled. "Today we're starting our self-defense unit. I want everyone to partner up and practice some basic moves." Madison felt her stomach drop. Self-defense class was exactly what she'd been hoping to avoid. "Madison," Coach Morrison called out, "why don't you partner with Brittany? She's one of our more experienced students." As Madison faced Brittany across the gym mat, she could see the calculation in the other girl's eyes. This wasn't just about learning self-defense, it was about testing the new student, pushing her to see how she would respond. "Don't worry," Brittany said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'll go easy on you since you're new." Madison nodded, settling into a stance that looked casual but was actually perfectly balanced. Years of training had taught her to hide her capabilities until the moment they were needed. "Ready?" Brittany asked, then immediately attempted to grab Madison's wrist in what was clearly meant to be an overly aggressive demonstration. Madison's response was instinctive and immediate. She redirected Brittany's momentum using a simple but effective technique that sent the other girls stumbling backward. To anyone watching, it looked like Brittany had simply lost her balance. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Madison said, rushing to help Brittany up. "I didn't mean to. It's fine," Brittany said, her eyes now hard with something that looked like genuine anger. "Just caught me off guard." But Madison could see that it wasn't fine. In trying to hide her capabilities, she'd made a mistake that would have consequences. Brittany Walsh was not someone who liked being made to look foolish. Even accidentally. As the class continued, Madison was careful to appear more clumsy and uncertain, allowing her partner to demonstrate techniques while she played the role of the inexperienced foreign student. But she could feel the weight of new attention, the way certain students were now watching her with a different kind of interest. The final bell rang, and Madison gathered her things with relief. Her first day at Westfield High was over, but she had the distinct feeling that her real challenges were just beginning. As she walked toward the main exit, she passed Chase Hamilton and Trevor Blackwood, a massive senior with a reputation for casual cruelty. Their conversation stopped as she approached, and Trevor's eyes followed her with the kind of predatory attention that Madison recognized from other contexts. "See you tomorrow, Madison," Chase called out, his voice carrying a note of challenge that confirmed her worst fears. Outside, Emma Morrison was waiting by her mother's car, waving Madison over with genuine enthusiasm. "How was your first day? Did you like your classes?" Madison managed a smile as she climbed into the car. "It was educational," she said, which was true in ways that Emma couldn't possibly understand. As they drove through the quiet streets of Westfield, Madison watched the familiar American suburban landscape pass by the window. She'd hoped that leaving Seoul would mean leaving behind the complications of her past, but it seemed that some challenges were universal. The Morrison house came into view, its warm lights promising safety and normalcy. But Madison knew better than to trust appearances. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges, and new opportunities to either fit in or stand out in dangerous ways. She touched the small scar on her knuckle, a reminder of the last time she'd allowed herself to be underestimated. Whatever Brittany Walsh and her friends had planned, Madison would be ready. But she hoped, for everyone's sake, that it wouldn't come to that. The second week at Westfield High began with what seemed like a small gesture of friendship. Madison found a note slipped into her locker Monday morning, written in Brittany's careful handwriting. "Study group at my house tonight, a P-Lit test prep. Come join us, 7 p.m. Address, 1247 Maple Street." Madison stared at the note, her instincts warring with her desire to fit in. In Seoul, she'd learned to read between the lines of social interactions, but American teenage culture remained partially mysterious to her. Was this a genuine olive branch or something else entirely? "What's that?" Emma asked, appearing at Madison's elbow with the casual nosiness of a younger sister. "Brittany Walsh invited me to a study group," Madison said, showing Emma the note. Emma's expression shifted immediately. "Brittany Walsh? Brittany Walsh? She's never invited anyone outside her inner circle to her house, let alone a study group." Is that unusual? Madison, Brittany doesn't need study groups. She has private tutors for everything. Her parents pay for the best test prep money can buy. Emma lowered her voice. This feels like a trap. But Madison had already made her decision. If this was a test, she would pass it. If it was a trap, she would spring it on her own terms. That evening, Madison walked the 12 blocks to Maple Street, declining the Morrisons' offer of a ride. She needed the time to think, to prepare herself for whatever she might encounter. The Walsh house was everything she'd expected from her brief observations of Brittany at school. A sprawling colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping and a circular driveway filled with expensive cars. Brittany answered the door wearing designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Madison's monthly stipend from the exchange program. Her smile was bright and welcoming, but Madison noticed the way her eyes assessed Madison's simple outfit, clean but clearly inexpensive. Madison, I'm so glad you could make it. Everyone's already here. The everyone turned out to be Chase, Hamilton, Vanessa Price, and 2 other students from their AP literature class, Riley Thompson and Jessica Wong. They were arranged around Brittany's enormous dining room table with textbooks and notebooks spread out in what looked like a legitimate study session. We thought we'd start with the symbolism in the pearl, Brittany said, settling into her chair with the authority of someone in her own domain. Since you had such interesting insights about Korean culture, we were hoping you could help us understand some of the deeper meanings. Madison sat down carefully, noting that her chair was positioned so that she faced the group while they could all observe her. I'm happy to help however I can. For the first hour, the session proceeded normally. They discussed Steinbeck's themes, analyzed character development, and shared interpretations of key passages. Madison contributed thoughtfully but didn't dominate the conversation, aware that she was still being evaluated. It was Jessica who changed the tone. Madison, can I ask you something kind of personal? Of course. What's it really like being an exchange student? I mean, do you feel like you have to represent your whole country or something? Madison considered the question. Sometimes. People often ask me to explain things as if I speak for all Korean people, which is impossible. We're individuals, just like Americans are. But you must have some insights into why Asian students are so much more successful academically, Chase interjected. I mean statistically, right? Madison felt the familiar tightness in her chest. Success comes from many factors. Hard work, support systems, opportunities. It's not really about ethnicity. Come on, Vanessa said, leaning forward. You can be honest with us. There's obviously something different about how you were raised. You made our discussion in lit class sound like a graduate seminar. I just enjoy reading and thinking about literature. In English, though, Riley added. That's what's so impressive. I can barely write a decent essay in my native language. And you're analyzing Steinbeck like you've been reading him your whole life. Madison set down her pen. I've been studying English since I was very young. My grandfather believed that understanding multiple languages was important for understanding the world. Your grandfather, Brittany said, her voice taking on a different quality. What did he do? He was a teacher. Madison didn't mention that he'd also been a master of traditional Korean martial arts, or that his lessons had extended far beyond language and literature. And your parents? Jessica asked. What do they do? Madison hesitated. The official story in her file was carefully constructed to avoid certain complications. My father works in international business. My mother is a nurse. International business, Chase repeated. That's pretty vague. What kind of international business? Import and export, various products and services. Madison kept her voice steady, but she could feel the questioning taking on an interrogative quality. And they just decided to send you to small-town Connecticut? Vanessa asked. That seems like a strange choice for someone in international business. Madison realized she was being cornered systematically. Each question seemed innocent enough, but together they formed a pattern designed to expose inconsistencies in her story. The exchange program coordinator thought a smaller school would be a good fit for me, she said, sticking to the official explanation. But why leave Seoul in the middle of the school year? Brittany pressed. That's not typical for exchange students. Madison felt her pulse quicken. These weren't casual questions. They were the result of research and planning. Sometimes circumstances change. Opportunities arise. Or disappear, Chase said quietly. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Madison realized that this entire evening had been constructed around getting her to reveal something, though she wasn't sure what they were looking for. I should probably head home, Madison said, beginning to gather her things. The Morrisons will be expecting me. Actually, Brittany said, standing up, we haven't finished our discussion. We were hoping you could help us understand something else. Madison remained seated, every instinct telling her to leave immediately. What's that? Brittany walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a manila folder. We did some research on the exchange program. It's interesting. There's no record of any emergency placements from Seoul this semester. Madison's blood turned to ice. I'm not sure what you mean. We called the program coordinator, Vanessa said, her voice taking on a cruel edge. Very helpful woman. She said there haven't been any emergency placements from Korea since last spring. There must be some confusion, Madison said, but her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. Is there? Chase asked. Because we also found something interesting about your supposedly host family in California. Riley opened a laptop and turned it toward Madison. On the screen was a news article from a San Diego newspaper dated 6 weeks earlier. Domestic violence incident leads to arrest. Minor involved in altercation. Madison read the headline and felt the careful structure of her new life beginning to crumble. The article was brief and didn't mention her by name, but the details were unmistakable. Care to explain? Brittany asked sweetly. Madison stood up slowly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I think there's been a misunderstanding. I don't think so, Jessica said. I think you're not really an exchange student at all. I think you're some kind of runaway who got placed in emergency foster care. That's not the question is, Chase interrupted. What exactly did you do in California that was so bad they had to move you across the country? Madison looked around the room at their faces, no longer the masks of teenage curiosity, but expressions of predatory satisfaction. They'd trapped her completely, and they knew it. I defended someone who couldn't defend herself, Madison said. Quietly, defended them how? Vanessa pressed. Madison met her gaze steadily, effectively. Brittany laughed, a sound without warmth. Oh, this is perfect. We have a little vigilante in our midst. What did you do? Call the police? Something like that. I bet it was more than that, Chase said, standing up and moving closer to Madison. I bet you got physical. That's what the article implies, isn't it? Some kind of altercation that involved a minor. Madison felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack. I should go. Should you? Brittany asked. Because here's the thing, Madison, or whatever your real name is, we can't have someone like you at our school. Someone with a history of violence. Someone who lies about their background. I never lied about anything important. You lied about everything, Riley said. Your story, your family, your reason for being here. How do we know you're not dangerous? Madison realized that the conversation had moved far beyond social intimidation into something that could have serious consequences. If they spread their discoveries around school, if they contacted the administration, if they somehow reached the authorities in California. What do you want? She asked. Brittany's smile was triumphant. That's better. We want you to understand your place here. You might be able to fool teachers with your sob story and your fake cultural insights, but you can't fool us. My cultural Insights aren't fake. Maybe not, Chase said, but your whole innocent exchange student act is. You're not here to learn about American culture. You're here because you got kicked out of your last placement for being violent. Madison felt the familiar surge of anger that had gotten her into trouble before. I protected someone who was being hurt, and now you're here, pretending to be something you're not, Vanessa said. Taking opportunities away from students who actually deserve them. What opportunities? Academic recognition, teacher attention, college recommendations. Brittany's voice was getting sharper. You think we don't notice how Mr. Hendricks hangs on your every word? How Mrs. Rodriguez praises your lab work? You're gaming the system with your exotic background and your fake tragic story. Madison understood now. This wasn't really about her lies or her past. It was about academic competition and the threat she represented to their carefully maintained positions at the top of the school hierarchy. I work hard in my classes, she said. The same as everyone else. But you have an unfair advantage, Jessica said. Teachers automatically assume you're more interesting, more insightful, more worth listening to because you're from another country. That's not true, isn't it? Chase asked. When's the last time Brittany got praised for a literary analysis the way you did on your first day? Madison looked around the room again, seeing the situation clearly for the first time. This wasn't about truth or fairness. It was about power and the threat that her presence posed to their established order. So what happens now? She asked. Now, you start acting like you understand your position here, Brittany said. No more showing off in class. No more impressing teachers with your profound insights. No more making the rest of us look bad. And if I don't, then we make sure everyone at school knows exactly what kind of person you really are, Vanessa said. Starting with the administration and ending with your precious host family. Madison felt trapped in a way she hadn't experienced since her grandfather's death. In Seoul, she'd had resources, connections, and ways to navigate complicated social situations. Here, she was isolated and vulnerable, dependent on the goodwill of people who barely knew her. I understand, she said finally. Good, Brittany said. I'm glad we had this talk. I think it's going to make things much easier for everyone. Madison gathered her things and walked toward the door, each step feeling like a small defeat. As she reached for the handle, Chase's voice stopped her. Oh, and Madison, one more thing. Stay away from Marcus Webb. He's been asking questions about you, and we don't want him getting any ideas about being your knight in shining armor. Madison turned back. What kind of questions? The kind that might make him think you need protecting, Jessica said. We wouldn't want him to get the wrong idea about the kind of person you are. Madison left the Walsh house with the weight of new understanding settling on her shoulders. The pleasant facade of small-town American life had been stripped away, revealing the same competitive cruelty she'd encountered in Seoul. But here, she had fewer resources and less support. The walk back to the Morrison house gave her time to think. Brittany and her friends held significant power at Westfield High, but power wasn't the same as invincibility. They'd made a mistake in revealing their research so completely. Now Madison knew exactly what they'd discovered, and, more importantly, what they hadn't. They didn't know about her training. They didn't know about her grandfather's lessons. They didn't know about the years she'd spent learning to defend herself and others. They saw her as vulnerable and isolated, and in some ways they were right. But vulnerability could be a weapon, too, if you knew how to use it. Back at the Morrison house, Madison found Janet and Robert watching television in the living room. They looked up as she entered, their expressions shifting from casual interest to concern as they saw her face. How was the study group? Janet asked. Educational, Madison replied, using the same word she'd used after her first day of school. You okay? You look upset. Madison considered telling them the truth, but realized that would only create more problems. The Morrisons were kind people, But they were also temporary guardians who might not understand the complexities of her situation. "Just tired," she said. "It was a long session." "Well, get some rest," Robert said. "Tomorrow's a new day." Madison nodded and headed upstairs to her room, Emma's room, really, though the younger girl had been gracious about sharing. She sat on the bed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her limited contacts. There was no one she could call. No one who would understand what she was facing or offer meaningful help. Her caseworker in California was dealing with other problems, and her emergency placement coordinator was focused on keeping her stable rather than helping her navigate social complexities. For the first time since arriving at Westfield, Madison felt truly alone. She opened her laptop and began researching her tormentors with the same systematic approach they'd used on her. If they wanted to play games with information and social pressure, she would learn the rules quickly. Brittany Walsh, daughter of Dr. Patricia Walsh, a prominent plastic surgeon, and James Walsh, a partner at the town's most prestigious law firm. Honor roll student since freshman year, president of the National Honor Society, captain of the debate team. College applications submitted to Yale, Harvard, and Princeton. Chase Hamilton, son of Mayor Robert Hamilton and District Attorney Sarah Hamilton, student body president, quarterback of the varsity football team, valedictorian candidate. Early admission to Stanford is already secured. The pattern was clear. These weren't just popular students. They were the children of Westfield's elite. Their parents held positions of power and influence in the community, which explained their confidence and their assumption that they could control Madison's fate. But information flowed both ways. And Madison had learned from her grandfather that knowledge was often more powerful than physical strength. She began to type, creating detailed profiles of each student who'd been at Brittany's house. Academic achievements, family connections, social media presence, patterns of behavior. She worked methodically, the same way she'd once studied opponents in martial arts competitions out by midnight. She had a comprehensive understanding of her enemies. More importantly, she had identified their vulnerabilities. Perfect grades and family connections could be strengths, but they could also be weaknesses if someone knew how to exploit them. Madison closed her laptop and lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests of her resolve. But tonight, she'd taken the first step toward evening the odds. Her grandfather had taught her that the most dangerous opponent was the one who appeared weakest. Tomorrow she would begin to show Brittany Walsh and her friends what that lesson really meant. But first, she would have to survive whatever they had planned for her next move in their cruel game. The campaign against Madison began subtly, the way forest fires start, with a single spark before consuming everything in their path. Wednesday morning, she arrived at her locker to find it slightly ajar, her combination lock hanging open. Inside, her carefully organized notebooks had been shuffled, and someone had drawn question marks in red ink across the cover of her literature. Journal. Madison examined the vandalism with clinical detachment. The handwriting was deliberately disguised, but the pressure and angle of the strokes suggested someone left-handed. Only two people in Brittany's inner circle fit that profile: Riley Thompson and Trevor Blackwood, who had been conspicuously absent from the study group confrontation. Trouble with your lock? Marcus Webb appeared beside her, carrying a worn messenger bag and sporting his usual paint-stained fingers. His concern seemed genuine, which made Madison immediately suspicious. "Just a mechanical issue," she replied, closing the locker door firmly. "Madison, can I ask you something?" Marcus lowered his voice, glancing around the hallway. "Are you in some kind of trouble? Because Chase Hamilton was asking me weird questions about you yesterday, and it felt like fishing for information." Madison studied Marcus's face, searching for signs of deception. His brown eyes were steady, his expression open and worried. Either he was a remarkably good actor, or his concern was real. "What kind of questions?" "Whether I'd noticed anything." Strange about your behavior. Whether you'd mentioned anything about your family or why you came here. Whether you seemed stable. Marcus paused. The last one really bothered me. Madison felt a chill run down her spine. If Chase was already planting seeds about her mental state, the campaign was more sophisticated than she'd anticipated. What did you tell him? That I barely know you, which is true. But Madison, if you need someone to talk to, someone who isn't part of the popular crowd politics. Marcus pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. My number. No strings attached. Madison took the paper, unsure whether to trust this unexpected offer of alliance. In Seoul, she'd learned that kindness could be a weapon as sharp as cruelty. Thank you, she said simply. First period, a P literature proceeded normally until Mr. Hendricks announced a partner project analyzing symbolism in contemporary works. I'll be assigning partners randomly, he said, reaching into a box of folded papers. Madison watched with growing dread as names were called. When Mr. Hendricks pulled her name, she held her breath. Madison Chun and ... Another slip of paper. Trevor Blackwood. Trevor, who had been slouching in the back corner of the classroom, looked up with a grin that reminded Madison of a shark sensing blood in the water. He was massive even by American standards, 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and casual menace, with the kind of presence that made other students unconsciously step aside in hallways. Looks like we're going to get to know each other real well, Trevor said as he moved to the desk beside Madison. His voice carried a hint of an accent she couldn't place, and his eyes held the flat coldness she'd seen in people who enjoyed causing pain. I look forward to working together, Madison replied, keeping her voice neutral. Oh, I bet you do. Trevor leaned closer, and Madison caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else, energy drinks, maybe, or artificial supplements. I heard you're real smart, real ... cultural. Mr. Hendricks was explaining the project requirements, but Madison found it difficult to concentrate with Trevor's presence, radiating hostility beside her. She took careful notes, aware that this partnership would be another test. So partner, Trevor said as the bell rang. My place or yours for our first study session? The library would be more appropriate, Madison suggested. Nah, I don't think. So, see, I like privacy when I'm getting to know someone new. Especially someone with such an interesting background. Madison gathered her books slowly, buying time to think. I prefer public spaces for academic work. And I prefer getting what I want. Trevor's voice dropped to a whisper that only she could hear. Friday after school. My house. Don't make me come looking for you. As Trevor left the classroom, Madison noticed that several students had witnessed the interaction. Their expressions ranged from sympathy to fascination, but no one approached her. The message was clear. Trevor Blackwood was not someone people crossed. Lunch period brought a new form of psychological warfare. Madison entered the cafeteria to find every table mysteriously full, except for one small table near the garbage cans. As she approached with her tray, conversations died down, then resumed in whispers. She sat alone, methodically eating her sandwich while cataloging the social dynamics around her. Brittany's table was the epicenter of activity, with students stopping by to pay court like subjects before a queen. Chase held similar influence at the athletes' table, his voice carrying across the room as he told some story that had everyone laughing. Mind if I sit? Madison looked up to see Sarah Chun, no relation, despite the shared surname standing with her lunch tray. Sarah was quiet, studious, and as far as Madison knew, unconnected to any of the major social factions. Please, Madison said, gesturing to the empty chair. Sarah sat down and immediately began eating, not speaking for several minutes. Finally, she looked up. They're trying to isolate you, she said quietly. I noticed. It's a standard playbook. First isolation, then escalation. I've seen it before. Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, clinical. The question is why they've decided you're a threat. Madison considered how much to reveal. Academic competition, maybe. Maybe. Or maybe they found out something about your background that they think gives them leverage. Sarah met Madison's eyes directly. I don't care what you did before you came here. Everyone deserves a chance to start over. But if you need someone who understands being on the outside, I'm here. It was the second offer of alliance Madison had received that day, and she found herself wondering if it was coincidence or coordination. But Sarah's offer felt different from Marcus's, less emotional, more strategic. Thank you, Madison said. I'll remember that. The afternoon brought new challenges. In chemistry class, Madison discovered that someone had tampered with her lab equipment, not enough to be dangerous, but sufficient to skew her results and make her look incompetent. She adapted quickly, recalibrating her measurements and completing the experiment successfully, but she noticed Mrs. Rodriguez watching her with concern. Is everything all right, Madison? The teacher asked as class ended. You seemed distracted today. Just adjusting to some social dynamics, Madison replied. Carefully, Mrs. Rodriguez nodded knowingly. High school can be challenging for any new student, but international students often face additional pressures. If you need someone to talk to, my door is always open. Madison thanked her and left, but she could feel the weight of adult attention settling around her like a net. If teachers started watching her more closely, documenting unusual behavior or academic problems, it would provide ammunition for Brittany's campaign. Physical education brought the day's most direct confrontation. Coach Morrison had arranged a self-defense demonstration, with students taking turns practicing techniques on volunteer attackers. When it came time for Madison to demonstrate, Trevor Blackwood stepped forward as her partner. This should be interesting, he said loudly enough for the class to hear. Let's see what our international students can do. Coach Morrison frowned at Trevor's tone but didn't intervene. Madison, show us how you'd respond to a wrist grab. Trevor reached for Madison's wrist, but instead of the controlled grab they'd been practicing, he seized it with genuine force, his fingers digging into her skin hard enough to bruise. Madison's response was automatic, a quick twist and pressure. Point manipulation that should have forced Trevor to release her grip. But Trevor was stronger than she'd anticipated, and he held on despite the pain, his eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Interesting technique, he said through gritted teeth. Where'd you learn that? Madison realized she'd made a mistake. Her response had been too skilled, too precise for someone who was supposed to be learning self-defense for the first time. My grandfather taught me some basic moves, she said, pulling her wrist free with a simpler technique. Your grandfather must have been quite a teacher, Coach Morrison observed. That was very advanced for a beginner. The damage was done. Madison could see the speculation in her classmates' eyes, the questions forming about what other skills she might be hiding. After class, Trevor cornered her in the equipment room. That was sloppy, he said, blocking her exit. You almost gave yourself away completely. I don't know what you mean. Sure you don't. Trevor stepped closer, using his size to intimidate. Here's the thing about secrets, Madison. They have a way of coming out. And when you do, it's going to be very bad for you. Are you threatening me? I'm educating you. See, Brittany might be satisfied with social pressure and academic sabotage, but I prefer more direct methods. Trevor's smile was cold. Tomorrow night, we're going to have our project meeting. Just you and me. And we're going to discuss exactly what kind of person you really are. Madison met his gaze steadily, drawing on years of training in controlling fear and projecting confidence. I'll see you in the library tomorrow. Wrong answer. Trevor moved even closer, close enough that she could feel his breath on her face. My house, 8 o'clock. Don't make me send a formal invitation. That evening, Madison sat in her temporary bedroom, surrounded by the research she'd compiled on her tormentors. The pattern was becoming clearer. This wasn't random teenage cruelty. but a coordinated campaign designed to drive her away from Westfield High. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to her caseworker in California. If the situation escalated much further, she would need adult intervention. But she knew that reaching out for help would be seen as weakness and would likely result in another emergency placement. Before she could finish the email, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Heard you had an interesting day. Things are just getting started. Sweet dreams, foreign girl." Madison deleted the message and closed her laptop. She walked to the window and looked out at the quiet suburban street with its neat lawns and peaceful homes. Somewhere out there, Brittany Walsh and her friends were planning their next move. Trevor Blackwood was deciding how far he was willing to go, but they had made a crucial error in their assessment of their target. They saw Madison as isolated and vulnerable, a victim to be manipulated and controlled. They didn't see the hours of training, the discipline learned through years of practice, the steel core hidden beneath her careful facade of compliance. Madison touched the small scar on her knuckle, a reminder of the last time someone had underestimated her. Tomorrow night, Trevor Blackwood would learn what her grandfather about the difference between being quiet and being weak. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to Marcus Webb. "Thank you for the offer today. I might need a friend. Sooner than I thought." His response came within minutes. "Whatever you need. Some of us still believe in doing the right thing." Madison smiled for the first time in days. Perhaps she wasn't as isolated as her enemies believed. Perhaps it was time to stop playing defense and start taking the initiative. She began planning her response to Trevor's ultimatum, drawing on strategies her grandfather had taught her about turning an opponent's strength against them. Tomorrow night, she will go to Trevor Blackwood's house. But she would go on her own terms with her own agenda. The game was about to change, and Madison intended to be the one changing it. She spent the rest of the evening preparing, both mentally and physically. Tomorrow would bring the confrontation that had been building since her first day at Westfield High. She intended to be ready for whatever Trevor Blackwood thought he could do to her. But first, she had one more piece of research to complete. She opened her laptop again and began searching for information about Trevor's family, his background, his own vulnerabilities. If he wanted to play games with secrets and threats, Madison would make sure she was holding all the cards. Friday evening arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made the air feel heavy and charged, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. Madison stood outside Trevor Blackwood's house at exactly 8 o'clock, studying the imposing structure before her. The Blackwood residence was a testament to old money red brick colonial with white columns, sprawling grounds surrounded by wrought iron fencing, and the kind of established landscaping that spoke of generations of wealth. She had spent the previous 24 hours in careful preparation. Her research had revealed that Trevor's father was a federal judge, his mother a prominent attorney specializing in criminal defense. The irony wasn't lost on her that the children of the justice system had become its antithesis within the halls of Westfield High. Madison had also discovered something else about Trevor: 3 different schools in 5 years, each transfer accompanied by vague references to disciplinary issues and better fits for his educational needs. The pattern suggested someone whose behavior had repeatedly crossed lines that even wealthy parents couldn't completely smooth over. She pressed the doorbell and waited, her breathing controlled and her stance deceptively casual. When Trevor opened the door, his smile held the anticipation of a predator finally cornering its prey. "Madison, right on time. I appreciate punctuality." He stepped aside to let her in, and she noticed he'd changed from his school clothes into jeans and a black shirt that emphasized his muscular build. "My parents are at some charity function downtown. Won't be back until midnight." The house's interior matched its exterior pretensions: expensive furniture arranged with magazine perfection, artwork that looked like museum pieces, and the kind of silence that came from rooms designed more for display than living. Trevor led her through a hallway lined with family photographs that chronicled years of privilege and achievement. "Impressive home," Madison said, following him into what appeared to be a study lined with leather-bound books that probably hadn't been opened in decades. "It serves its purpose." Trevor gestured toward a chair positioned in front of a massive oak desk. "Have a seat. We need to have a conversation about your future at Westfield High." Madison remained standing. "I thought we were here to work on our literature project." "Oh, we are. See, I think you're a very interesting piece of literature yourself. A story with lots of missing chapters and some very creative editing." Trevor moved behind the desk, opening a laptop computer. "Want to see what I've been reading about you?" The screen displayed a collection of documents and web pages that made Madison's blood run cold. Somehow, Trevor had obtained copies of police reports from California, case files from her emergency placement, and even academic records from her school in Seoul. "Impressive research," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I have resources you can't imagine." Daddy's connections in law enforcement are very helpful when you need information about someone with a questionable past. Trevor's smile widened. "Did you really think you could hide what you did to Richard Morrison? The restraining order? The assault charges that mysteriously disappeared?" Madison felt the familiar surge of anger, but this time she welcomed it. Richard Morrison had been beating his wife for years, and the night Madison intervened had been the night he'd finally crossed the line into attempting murder. She'd broken his nose and 3 ribs, and she'd do it again without hesitation. Richard Morrison was a dangerous man who was hurting someone who couldn't protect herself, according to you. According to the police reports, you attacked an innocent man in his own home and put him in the hospital. Trevor stood up, moving around the desk toward her. "The only reason you didn't go to juvenile detention is because Daddy Morrison was too embarrassed to press charges against a teenage girl. Is there a point to this conversation? The point is that you're not the innocent exchange student everyone thinks you are. You're violent, unstable, and dangerous. And I can't allow someone like that to continue contaminating our school environment." Madison realized that Trevor's research had been more thorough than she'd anticipated, but also more selective. He'd found the official reports that painted her in the worst possible light, but he'd missed the deeper truth about what had really happened in California. "So what do you want?" she asked. "I want you gone. Transferred out, dropped from the program. Sent back to whatever hole you crawled out of." Trevor was close enough now that she could see the excitement in his eyes. "But before that happens, I think you need to understand what happens to people who don't belong here." Without warning, Trevor lunged forward, his hand reaching for Madison's throat. It was the move of someone accustomed to using size and strength to intimidate, someone who had never encountered real resistance. Madison's response was instantaneous and devastating. She sidestepped his charge, grabbed his extended wrist, and used his own momentum to send him crashing into the bookshelf behind her. Leather volumes scattered to the floor as Trevor struggled to regain his balance. "That was a mistake," Madison said quietly. Trevor spun around, his face flushed with rage and humiliation. "You little," he charged again, this time with more calculation, trying to use his wrestling experience to grapple with her. Madison allowed him to close the distance, then demonstrated why her grandfather's training had emphasized redirection over resistance. She ducked under his arms, swept his legs, and sent him crashing to the hardwood floor. "Stop playing games," Trevor snarled, climbing to his feet. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead where he'd struck the bookshelf. "I know what you are. Now, some kind of martial arts freak. But that just makes this more interesting." Madison finally understood what she was dealing with. Trevor Blackwood wasn't just a bully. He was someone who genuinely enjoyed inflicting pain. Someone who saw violence as entertainment rather than necessity. "You should stop," she said, backing toward the study's open doorway. "This doesn't have to escalate." "But I want it to escalate." Trevor wiped blood from his forehead and smiled. "See, I've been looking forward to this since Brittany told me about your little secrets. I've been wondering what it would take to break the mysterious Madison Chun." He moved toward a display case mounted on the wall, pulling out what appeared to be an antique sword, probably a family heirloom worth more than most people's cars. The blade gleamed under the study's elegant lighting. "Trevor, put that down. Or what? You'll use your little karate moves on me?" He swung the sword experimentally, clearly enjoying the weight and balance. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to get on your knees and apologize for lying to our school, for taking up space that belongs to real American students, for existing in my town." Madison realized that the situation had moved far beyond teenage bullying into genuinely dangerous territory. Trevor Blackwood was armed, alone with her in an empty house, and displaying signs of genuine psychological instability. "And then," Trevor continued, his voice taking on a dreamy quality, "you're going to eat some dirt. Real dirt from the garden. Outside. Just like you should have been doing all along, instead of pretending to be something you're not." Madison felt her grandfather's training take over completely. Years of discipline, control, and strategic thinking crystallized into perfect clarity. She was no longer Madison Chun, the isolated exchange student trying to fit in. She was the granddaughter of Master Chen Wei-ming, inheritor of traditions that stretched back centuries. "Last chance, Trevor. Put down the sword, and we can forget this happened." Trevor's laugh was genuinely unhinged. "I don't think you understand the situation. You're in. Nobody knows you're here. Nobody will hear you scream. And by the time my parents get home, you'll be long gone, probably running back to whatever third world." Madison moved. The technique her grandfather had called striking thunder was designed to end conflicts before they could truly begin. She closed the distance between herself and Trevor in a single fluid motion, her right foot connecting with his solar plexus with enough force to lift him off the ground. Trevor's eyes went wide with shock and pain as the air exploded from his lungs. The antique sword clattered to the floor as he doubled over, gasping for breath that wouldn't come. But Madison wasn't finished. Years of suppressed anger at the bullies in Seoul, at the system that had failed to protect Richard Morrison's wife, at every person who had ever underestimated her because of her size or gender or ethnicity, poured out in a series of strikes that were precise, calculated, and devastating. A palm strike to Trevor's chest sent him staggering backward. A sweep kick toppled him to the floor. And then, as he tried to crawl away, Madison's final technique, a perfectly executed front kick to his face, connected with a sound like breaking. Pottery. Trevor Blackwood's scream echoed through the empty house as blood erupted from his mouth. 3 teeth, including both front incisors, scattered across the expensive Persian rug like fragments of broken china. Madison stood over him, her breathing controlled, her stance balanced, watching as Trevor writhed on the floor, clutching his ruined mouth. The rage that had driven her was gone, replaced by the cold satisfaction of a problem definitively solved. "You wanted to know what kind of person I really am," she said quietly. "Now you know." Trevor tried to speak, but only managed to spray more blood across the floor. Madison knelt beside him, close enough to be heard clearly. "Here's what happens. Next, you're going to tell everyone that you had an accident, fell down the stairs, maybe, or walked into a door. Because if you tell anyone what really happened here, I'll make sure they also hear about your collection of downloaded videos, the ones hidden in the folder labeled school projects on your computer." Trevor's eyes went wide with terror. Madison's research had been more thorough than he'd realized. "You're also going to call off Brittany and the rest of your friends. No more harassment, no more social warfare, no more attempts to drive me out of Westfield High. Because if any of you bother me again, what happened tonight will seem gentle by comparison." Madison stood up and walked toward the door, pausing to look back at the wreckage of Trevor Blackwood's confidence. "Oh, and Trevor? Clean up this mess before your parents get home. Bloodstains are so difficult to explain. She left through the front door, walking calmly down the driveway and onto the sidewalk. The evening air felt clean and fresh after the oppressive atmosphere of the Blackwood house. For the first time since arriving in Westfield, Madison felt truly free. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus Webb. "Everything okay? Saw you walking past my house. You look different somehow." Madison smiled and typed back, "Just handled some unfinished business. See you Monday." The weekend passed quietly. Madison spent Saturday helping Janet Morrison in the garden, finding unexpected peace in the simple act of planting flowers. On Sunday, she accompanied the family to church, sitting in the back pew and listening to a sermon about forgiveness and redemption that struck her as particularly relevant. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in New England. Madison walked into Westfield High School and immediately noticed the difference in the atmosphere. Students who had been avoiding her for the past week now watched her with something approaching respect. Word had spread, though she wasn't sure exactly what version of events was making the rounds. Trevor Blackwood was absent from first-period literature class. According to the substitute teacher, he'd had a dental emergency over the weekend and would be out for several days. At lunch, Madison found herself with multiple options for seating. The isolation campaign had ended as suddenly as it had begun. She chose to sit with Sarah Chun and Marcus Webb, who had apparently formed an alliance of outcasts and artists. "So," Marcus said, unwrapping a sandwich, "rumor has it that Trevor Blackwood won't be bothering anyone for a while." "I heard he had an accident," Madison replied innocently. "Funny thing about accidents," Sarah added. "They tend to happen to people who don't watch where they're going." Wednesday brought Trevor's return to school, sporting obvious dental work and a demeanor that was subdued to the point of being unrecognizable. He avoided eye contact with Madison completely, and when they were forced to work together in literature class, he was polite to the point of servility. Brittany Walsh and her crew maintained their distance as well, though Madison occasionally caught them watching her with expressions that mixed fear with grudging respect. The social warfare had ended as decisively as the physical confrontation. Principal Davis called Madison into his office Friday afternoon, 2 weeks after her showdown with Trevor. "Madison, I wanted to check in with you about how you're adjusting to life at Westfield High. I know that transition can be challenging for international students." "I think I've found my place here," Madison replied honestly. "Excellent. Your teachers have been very impressed with your academic performance and your maturity in handling social situations." Principal Davis consulted a file on his desk. "I've received some very positive feedback about your integration into the school community." Madison nodded, recognizing the coded language. Whatever version of recent events had reached the administration, it had painted her in a favorable light. "There is one thing I wanted to discuss with you," Principal Davis continued. "We've had an inquiry from the State Martial Arts Association about starting a self-defense program here at Westfield. Would you be interested in helping to develop such a program?" Madison considered the offer carefully. Teaching would mean revealing more about her background, but it would also provide a legitimate outlet for skills she could no longer completely hide. "I would be honored to help," she said. "Wonderful. I'll put you in touch with our athletic coordinator." As Madison left the principal's office, she reflected on how completely her situation had transformed. 3 weeks ago, she'd been an isolated outsider fighting for basic acceptance. Now she was being asked to take a leadership role in shaping her school's culture. Emma Morrison was waiting by her locker with the excitement of someone bursting with gossip. "Madison, did you hear? Trevor Blackwood is transferring schools. His parents are sending him to some military academy in Virginia." "Really?" Madison said, though she wasn't particularly surprised. The Blackwood family would want to minimize any further embarrassment. And Brittany Walsh lost her position as National Honor Society president. Something about academic integrity violations. Emma's eyes sparkled with the delight of seeing the mighty fallen. Plus, Chase Hamilton's early admission to Stanford got revoked. Apparently, they received some anonymous information about his extracurricular activities. Madison made appropriate sympathetic noises while privately noting that her research had been put to good use. She'd never sent any information to Stanford directly, but she had made sure that certain facts found their way to people who would know what to do with them. Justice, Emma concluded with satisfaction, has been served. As Madison walked home that afternoon, she passed the park where she'd first encountered Trevor's threats. The autumn leaves were beginning to fall, covering the ground in gold and crimson that reminded her of the seasonal changes in Seoul. Her phone rang, a video call from her grandfather's old friend in Korea, Master Park, who had been helping to coordinate her placement in America. Madison, my dear student, you look well. How are you finding life in your new school? It's been educational, Madison replied, using her favorite diplomatic answer. Ah, I see. And have you had occasion to practice any of the lessons your grandfather taught you? Madison smiled, understanding that Master Park's intelligence network was more extensive than most people realized. Once or twice. But mostly I've been applying his teachings about patience and strategic thinking. Excellent. Remember, the greatest victories are achieved without fighting, but sometimes. Master Park's eyes twinkled with understanding. Sometimes one must demonstrate strength to achieve peace. I understand, Master Park. Good. Your grandfather would be proud of how you've handled yourself. He always said you had the heart of a warrior and the wisdom to know when to use it. That evening, Madison sat in her temporary bedroom, looking out at the quiet American suburb that had become her battlefield and then her home. The Morrison family was downstairs watching television, their laughter drifting up through the floors like music. She opened her laptop and began typing an email to her caseworker in California. Dear Ms. Rodriguez, I wanted to update you on my placement at Westfield High School. I'm pleased to report that I've successfully integrated into the school community and have found my place here. The initial adjustment challenges have been resolved, and I'm now looking forward to completing the remainder of the academic year in a positive environment. I've also been asked to help develop a martial arts program for the school, which will allow me to share some of my cultural background in a constructive way. I believe this opportunity will be beneficial both for me and for my fellow students. Thank you for your support during this transition. I'm grateful for the chance to start fresh and build something positive from a difficult situation. Sincerely, Madison Chun. As she hit send, Madison reflected on the strange journey that had brought her to this moment. She'd come to Westfield as a refugee from her own choices, seeking anonymity and a quiet place to rebuild her life. Instead, she'd found herself fighting the same battles against injustice and cruelty that had gotten her into trouble in California. This time, she'd been smarter about it. This time, she'd used her grandfather's teachings not just about martial arts, but about strategy, patience, and the importance of choosing your battles wisely. The girl who had arrived at Westfield High 3 weeks ago, scared, isolated, and trying desperately to hide her true nature, was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, more confident, and more at peace with who she really was. Madison Chun was no longer running from her past. She was building her future, one carefully chosen battle at a time. Outside her window, the autumn night was peaceful and quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to apply her grandfather's wisdom. But tonight, for the first time in months, Madison felt truly at home. The warrior had found her place. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.